Welcome to the Capital News. I am your host, Alex Kreitis. Today is June 27th, 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. So, the Democrats debate take two. Tonight was the second round of debates for the Democratic contenders for the presidency in the 2020 elections. Pretty much par for the course. It was a little more exciting, I would have to say, this evening as opposed to last night. I think that was probably a function of the fact that there were a little bit more colorful personalities on the stage. Of course, we had Joe Biden, we had crazy Bernie Sanders, we had Senator Kamala Harris, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who, just thinking of that woman, I cannot stand the sound of her voice, to be perfectly honest with you guys. I just cannot. I don't know what she's talking about. She doesn't know what she's talking about. And she just tried to interrupt as much as she could. Very distasteful, very unappealing to me. I don't like it. But she's going to be there for a little while, so we're just going to have to deal with it. And of course, you had a whole host of others up on the stage too. Mayor Pete Buttigieg was up there, and a couple of others. But the main group, if you will, Buttigieg, Biden, Bernie, and Kamala Harris. So I think they made their points. I think this group was a little bit more polished than the one last night. Also, probably a function of the fact that they went second. They could polish up on some of the things that the first round. They missed their opportunities, I think, attacking President Trump. Not that I'm for that, but that's typically what you're going to see in these types of debates. It's what we expect. Democrats are going to attack the Republicans are going to attack the Democrats, and round we go. But during that first debate yesterday, there was not a lot of attacks on President Trump, which was surprising. None of the candidates really pivoted, which is what these politicians always do when they're asked a question. They might be asked a question on health care, and they start talking about foreign policy. So I'm very surprised that none of them really went after the president, because there's a lot they can go after. Again, not that I'm for that, but that's what we expect. There was some more attacks on the president this evening, but I do understand also at the same time, when you have such a crowded field, it's difficult. It's difficult to really have a thorough debate in a 2-hour time span with commercials, with questions that, quite frankly, are pretty stupid a lot of the time when it's coming. Again, this is MSNBC and NBC hosting these debates. Now, some of the stupid questions that I'm talking about are, give us one word. Give us 2-word responses. I mean, do you really expect these politicians to honor that and only give a 1-word response or a 2-word response? I mean, it's just a joke. I mean, it's not like these moderators, Rachel Maddow, Chuck Todd, and the like, they know what they're going to do. They say it when they're asking the question, please. They say, please. 1-word response, 2-word response. Stop asking these questions. It turns off the audience. You can hear the mumblings in the audience behind them when they start grandstanding and start reading off paragraphs. It doesn't make any sense. Ask some fundamental questions. So I'm not going to bore you guys to death because it was pretty much a recap of yesterday, which is expected. This is the first round of debates here. You got 20-some candidates. Again, I think that's a good thing for the health of our republic, to have as many voices as possible running for president. This was true again back in 2012 on the Republican side. 2016, it was a crying shame that it was the coronation, basically, of Queen Hillary Clinton up against crazy Bernie Sanders. That's not the way this country is supposed to operate. So we'll see what happens. I am pretty much against most of these candidates on the vast majority of their policy prescriptions, but nevertheless, it's a good thing for the Americans to hear both sides of the argument. My fear now is the Democrats are moving so far to the left that you actually have candidates who are claiming to be socialists and think that that's the way to go. It is not the way to go. They continue to argue for and advocate for Medicare for all or a universal healthcare system. This is not the way to go. We have these arguments all the time. So we're going to keep you updated on how they progress. I do not anticipate that it's going to change anytime soon. They're going to dig their heels in. You had Elizabeth Warren raise her hand last night saying, I want Medicare for all. Again, you had a similar question today. Most of the candidates were for that type of system. You still have the back and forth. Some of them are, sort of tiptoeing into it. They're still a little cautious as to, do I want to go all the way to the left, or should we have some sort of hybrid system where we still have Medicare existing, but we also have private insurers existing at the same time, and we allow people to choose? Again, I thought the Democratic Party was the party of choice. You have the party to choose here. You have the right to choose if you want an abortion, you don't want an abortion. But when it comes to health care, you actually only have one choice: Uncle Sam, the federal government. So right now, again, if we look at the numbers when it comes to Medicare, we're talking about spending $1.2 trillion per year. And somehow these Democrats think that upping that cost is going to solve the problem. Makes no sense whatsoever. There was one candidate, what's her name, Marianne Williamson, an author. She's one of the candidates who is obviously on the wings of the stage. She's out there, maybe a 1%er, if you will, from the standpoint of how much support she has at this juncture. But nevertheless, she made the point, which we make here at the Capital News all the time, that it's not just a health care problem. It is a health problem. When you look around the rest of the world and you look at how much money they spend per capita, it's not even close. We beat them by a mile. And beating them in this is not a good thing, by the way. 17% of U.S. GDP is spent on health care. And quite honestly, it should be called sick care. Why do we have so many problems? Why are so many people on so much medication? Why are so many people overweight and obese? You know how many problems that causes down the line? You think that's going to make things cheaper or more expensive? It's going to make them more expensive. It's a no-brainer. This is a huge problem. And to her credit, she made the point that this is just beyond going after insurance companies or complaining that they're making profits at the expense of sick people. Okay, yada, yada, yada. We get it. She also brought in the other industries that are around this. The pharmaceutical industry, the food industry. I mean, what are people putting in their bodies? We are what we eat. It's a very true statement. How much junk are people ingesting every single day? That's the problem. It's habits. How many people are exercising every single day? Not enough, obviously. Because if you're spending 17% of an economy that's $18, $19 trillion, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. And how do they propose solving this? Oh, let's just give Medicare to everybody. That's all. How are you going to pay for it? Well, they didn't really get into that, did they? Well, we're going to tax the rich. There ain't enough money to tax the rich to solve this problem. These are big issues. These are health decisions. How are you going to change that? That's a bigger question. They also talked about student loans, free education, yada, yada, yada. How are you going to pay for it? They don't know, but we're going to do it because we shouldn't have done it. I mean, give me something concrete here instead of just the talking points. And again, I know it's difficult in this type of setting. There's 10 of them up there. Of course, some of them are trying to talk over each other to get their airtime. But give some real solutions here, people. All of this debt forgiveness, people don't understand what this means. The moral hazard that this causes. We were talking about this yesterday. If you believe or know that you're going to be forgiven your debt, well, you're just going to go to school for whatever you want, whatever university you can get into, because the cost is completely irrelevant. Completely irrelevant, because it's going to be all forgiven. And what else are you going to do with some of that money? Maybe it's not all going to go to education. Maybe you're going to go buy some other things with it. I mean, this is a serious problem. Now, this is unlikely going to happen. I don't think even if one of these candidates should win and become president, which I still do not believe is going to happen, although it could, I still do think President Trump will win re-election. It's not because I'm a huge advocate for the president, as many of you know, but I just don't see these candidates having enough ideas, having the actual solutions to energize enough people to win in 2020. I could be wrong, and I am willing to change my mind. We will see what happens over the course of this election cycle. We are very early on in this process. Again, these are the first round of debates. There will be many more to come. One of the other topics that really became more front and center today, because Andrew Yang, a former tech executive, was on the stage this evening as well, and he's basically talking about a basic universal income, pretty much giving a quote-unquote what he likes to call a freedom dividend of $1,000 per month per individual who is 18 years or older, as to provide for a basic level of income. Now, this is going to have to be a topic of another show. The thing that he does bring up that nobody else is talking about, but of course we bring it up here, is the future of automation. Automation is already here. It is already displacing not thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but millions of jobs. As these technologies get better, as they get smarter, as they are able to basically program themselves, you will have the displacement of millions and millions of Americans. Nobody is having this conversation, so I have to applaud Andrew Yang of bringing this front and center. How much traction it's going to get is anybody's question, is anybody's guess. My guess is it's not going to gain that much traction, unfortunately. This is the type of scenario that catapulted Donald Trump into the Oval Office, because he was basically preying on people longing for yesteryear. When you had all of these manufacturing jobs, even when you have a whole bunch of jobs in retail and everywhere else, the forgotten men and women of this country. And he wants to point the finger and blame external factors. It's illegal immigration. It's the Chinese. It's somebody else. A lot of this went by the wayside because of technological advancement. This conversation is not being had in this country when it needs to be. We are in the 21st century. I mean, you can look back to provide perspective just 50 years ago. What types of technologies do we have then compared to today? Supercomputers that took up the size of huge rooms, warehouses. Now you have a phone in your pocket that's so much more powerful than those supercomputers 30, 40, 50 years ago. It's ridiculous. What do we think is going to happen over the next 50 years? What is this going to mean for employment? President Trump was promising to bring these jobs back. These jobs are gone. They ain't coming back, a lot of them. And it's not because illegal immigrants took them. It's not because the Chinese took them. It's because there have been technological advancements that have increased productivity, that can do the job that people do. Do you think that's going to accelerate or slow down? I think it's going to accelerate. That's what it's going to do. No question about it. But we as a nation are not having that conversation. The globe isn't having this conversation, because this isn't just going to affect the United States of America. This is going to affect the entire global population. Robots don't need to punch in and punch out. They're not going to give you attitude. They're not going to complain about being underpaid. They're not going to complain about other colleagues. You shut them down for basic maintenance, you turn them right back up, and there they go. They're on time, and they rarely make mistakes. What do you think businesses are going to do? Especially if we continue to live in a climate where it's all about profit at any cost. They're not going to concern themselves, major corporations, with the human element. So you have the Rust Belt. It is likely to expand, unfortunately, because you're going to have computer systems and robots that just displace millions and millions of people. Can everybody become a computer scientist, an engineer? No, unfortunately they cannot. And not everybody should be. Maybe that's not what you're interested in. We shouldn't have to go through life, quote unquote, working for the man. That should not be the goal. The goal should be freedom and happiness. But we live in a society that is so industrialized and so focused on work that people forget to stop and smell the roses. That's the bigger issue. And again, we don't have that conversation in this country either. So do I expect this conversation to become front and center? Unfortunately, I do not. But again, I have to applaud Andrew Yang for bringing it up, but we'll see what happens. But this is going to have to be a topic of many, many more discussions as we move forward. Again, I have to refer you guys to Joe Rogan and his podcast, and you can have this. I think he's had multiple interviews with multiple guests when it comes to artificial intelligence. So I really recommend you check them out because it's very eye-opening. Because you have people like Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla, and so many other companies that he's involved with, talking about how he was strongly telling government officials years ago, you have to have a national conversation and you have to slow this down. Now he's basically thrown his hands up in the air and said, well, there's no stopping it now. I tried to talk to the President of the United States. I tried to talk to members of Congress. I tried to talk to as many global leaders as I possibly could, tell them you have to have a conversation. You have to slow down this technological advancement because it's going to displace so many people. It's going to basically take over at some point in the future, and probably the not too distant future, by the way. Now, again, he's just thrown his hands up and said, hey, look, it's here, it's coming. I did my best. It wasn't good enough. So we're just going to have to, strap ourselves in and see what happens. I happen to believe and agree with him. There's other people who think it's not going to be a big deal. We'll be fine, yada, yada, yada. This is different than electricity. This is different than the tractor, okay? This is something completely different. And if we had a national conversation, and if we had people truly at the helm who understood these types of technologies, and I'm not sitting here pretending to understand all these things. It's not my forte. But I think I am intelligent enough to listen to some of these people who understand this industry, who are at the forefront of this industry, and make some reasonable conclusions. And we most definitely, at the very least, have to have a national conversation as to what's transpiring. Because a lot of the manufacturing jobs, they will eventually be replaced, like they already have been and are being replaced by robots. Wait till 3D printing really catches its legs. I mean, you're just going to have people walking around to make sure the machines are working. So buckle up and get ready for that. One of the other major talking points today, more so than last night, but it was discussed last night as well, is climate change. And one of the biggest crises, one of the biggest problems, according to virtually the entire Democratic field, is climate change. Okay, if you're of that persuasion, they can make their arguments. This is continuing with basically the grand, great new Green Deal, which is just a nightmare. But nevertheless, this is what this side of the political spectrum is advocating for. Maybe not to that extreme, but there are some people who obviously agree with it. I am for energy sources, all of the above. Let's do solar if we can do solar. Let's do wind if we can do wind. Geothermal, take advantage of tidal waves or wave technologies, those types of things. All of the above, I'm for it. I don't want industries demolished for political talking points. You're not just going to have a whole bunch of people who are working in the oil and gas industry walk up, get off the job, and go into making solar panels. It's a different skill set. So to think that you can just wipe away these jobs in an economy, in a global economy that functions off of oil and gas and think, well, let's snap the fingers, we can just switch it like it's nothing, is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Now, of course, the word is climate change. It used to be global warming. So I don't know if that's switching, if we're actually cooling, or it's just, what are they saying? Because if it is global warming, we're better off with global warming than we are with global cooling, from what I understand. Because if you look back through history, when man was around, it's the great cooling periods that really do us in. Global warming would be better than global cooling for the human race. Now, one of the things that gives me great concern on the global warming side of things is what type of viruses may be lying dormant, waiting for temperatures to increase. because that's when they can survive. That's what gives me pause. That's what gives me caution. Because if you have some sort of virus that's been lying dormant for years, we might not have any type of immunity for it. We might not have any type of vaccine for it. We might not have any type of remedy for it. And that could cause a big problem. But all this talk about CO2 gas, we need CO2. We are carbon-based. I just don't get it. I just don't get it. And another thing, this planet has gone through cooling periods. It's gone through heating periods. Back and forth. When we were here, when we weren't here. This is a lot of arrogance on our part to think that we have such a contributing factor to what takes place on this planet. We most definitely have an effect. Are we culprit? Not even close, in my opinion. Not even close. What Mother Nature wants to do to us, Mother Nature's going to do to us. We're not stopping the tsunamis. We're not stopping earthquakes. We're not stopping volcanic eruptions. Mother Nature wants us gone. We're gone, baby. Ain't no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So we're going to have to pay attention to this one because this will be front and center throughout the entirety of this election process. Global warming will be part of the discussion. Some of the candidates took their opportunity today to attack Donald Trump a little bit more than what they did yesterday. Again, last night there really wasn't that much attacks on the president. They opened up a little bit more on the president today, really saying, we have to beat him, yada, yada, yada. I'm not going to go through it. We're going to have enough of this throughout its entirety. Of course, we said yesterday the president was likely to make comments on last night's debate. He, of course, did, calling it boring. Also called out the technical glitch that we thought he would do, and he did, saying highly unprofessional of the fake news media, which was actually pretty funny, I have to admit. So no surprise there. We'll see what he starts tweeting out today, but he is over there in Japan kicking off the G20 meeting, which we will get to in the economic podcast today. One of the most interesting things I think that was stated during this evening's debate was actually in Bernie Sanders, his final comments at the end of the debate. Basically saying that we can all have our plans, we can all talk a big game, we can all do this, that, and the other, but nothing has changed. And nothing has changed because of big business, because of the military-industrial complex, because of the power that the energy industry has, that the insurance industry has, that major banks in this country have. I have to agree with him. We talk about this here all the time. The biggest difference between Bernie Sanders and myself is Bernie Sanders is a socialist. I'm a free market capitalist. Bernie Sanders has the ability to identify the problem, to diagnose the problem. But his biggest problem are his solutions. I believe I've used the analogy on this podcast many times before. It's like being a doctor. You identify that a patient has cancer, and Bernie wants to amputate. Or maybe Bernie finds out, well, it's just a little head cold, and Bernie still wants to amputate. It makes no sense whatsoever. There are other remedies. There are ways to solve the problem. Again, kudos to Bernie Sanders, and any other candidate for that matter, who understands the problems and where they come from. But his solutions are off the wall. Makes no sense at all. Now, I do want to read a couple passages from our book, The Cynic's Guide to Investing, because, again, I agreed with Bernie Sanders. There is too much power from big business. Big business and big government are joined at the hip. There is no sunlight between the two. This is not a free market capitalistic country, ladies and gentlemen. This is a fascist state. It is the merger of big corporations and big government. The funny thing, again, with Bernie and a lot of these Democrats, they identify this, but then they think government is the solution. Government is not the solution. Government is part of the problem. These major corporations can write as many bills as they want to. They can submit them to their representative or senator of choice. It doesn't mean it's going to be passed. It doesn't mean it's going to be signed by the president. Therefore, this means that government, or elected officials, up including the President of the United States, is willing to take these bills from these major corporations, debate them, pass them, and then sign them into law. That means this is a government problem. I can write as many letters as I want to the president. Doesn't mean he's going to do what I say. Now, of course, I'm not sending him millions of dollars either, paying for his campaign. That's one of the big problems. But let me just read a little bit here, and I'm probably going to follow up on this at another time, probably multiple times, because this still rings true. Now, of course, some of the numbers have, of course, changed since this book has been published, but it's still the gist of it. So let me read you a couple paragraphs here. The math on this is simple. M equals P, or money equals power, and round we go. If we look just a bit further, we see that of the 5 sectors selected from above, $1.8 billion translates into over $3 million per member of Congress. That is a lot of money and a ton of power. How much do you think your vote and your voice are worth? On top of this, we can look at total lobbying dollars spent, and now we are talking nearly $6 million per member of Congress. And on top of that, if we consider there were almost 12,300 lobbyists in 2013, then we are talking 23 lobbyists per member of Congress. Can anyone say military-industrial complex? This is exactly what Bernie Sanders called out. This is what Donald Trump was calling out when he was candidate Trump. This is what Barack Obama used to call out. This is what these politicians do. They identify things, and then they get elected, and then they allow the swamp, they allow the system to consume them and to destroy this country in the process. This is unbelievable. Let me continue lastly here. If you take away the money and power that Congress currently possess, then the incentive to lobby Congress greatly diminishes. You cannot get what they do not have. Our solution is to repeal the 16th Amendment and abolish the income tax. I've been saying this for years, folks. Been saying this for years. Sound like a good idea? Regardless of whether or not you agree with us, we the people do have the power to hold our public officials accountable. And as difficult as it is and will be, we can change this practice. I'm waiting to see what happens. I don't think these Democrats are going to do it. I have serious concerns and doubts now about Donald Trump because of what he said, what is being done, the $1 trillion that are being added to our national debt on a yearly basis with no end in sight by admission of the Trump administration itself. So where are the fiscal conservatives? I have no idea. So for me to get up here and start complaining about a whole bunch of Democrats coming in to want to spend trillions of dollars, I mean, it's just what you want. What do you want? You want Donald Trump's version of trillions of dollars of spending, or do you want the Democrats' version of trillions of dollars of spending, which, by the way, we do not have? Thank you so much for joining me today, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a pleasure having you as always. Please like, share, subscribe, get the word out, and leave your comments. We do love hearing from you. This is the Capital News. I am Alex Kreitis. Godspeed.